Hey everyone, this is Karen Waksman, founder of Retail MBA, and I'm so excited for this interview. This is my dear friend Gary. Gary and I have known each other for, Gary Nealon, we've known each other for a few years now, I would say, at least.
Yep.
We are part of the same kind of mastermind group. It's called Maverick 1000. And, Gary has a really awesome story. He actually was a e-commerce company. He had an e-commerce company, one of many companies I think that you've had, right? And I'll
Yep.
have you explain yourself. But essentially, he sold his company recently. And the reason I asked him to be here with us today is to talk about his experience as an entrepreneur. What was it like preparing for a sale, thinking about the sale, what happened, the success of it, kind of the failures and whatever you want to call it, but essentially the experience around it. And our goal was just to help you. We really just wanted to support you guys and all those people out there who are just thinking about doing something with their company, letting it go eventually and so forth. So I really just wanted to help. And I appreciate Gary. He actually recently sold the company, so he's just kind of supporting others and hanging out and just doing this from the love of his heart. So thank you so much for being here, Gary.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So why don't you give your bio, your version of the bio, and so they know who you are, why you know what you're talking about, maybe a little bit of an explanation about, why you wanted to kind of chat with people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I have a couple different companies. The one that I just sold was an e-commerce company that I started about 11 years ago. So it was a unique e-commerce company. It was partially e-commerce, partially retail, it was big bulky products. It was actually in the kitchen cabinet niche. So we were almost online. We were about 90% online cabinet company that drop shipped most of our products all around the U.S. and Canada. And then we also had two facilities in Pennsylvania. We had a 30,000 square foot facility with a showroom and our offices. And then we had a shared resource of about 150,000 square feet, about 2 hours north of Philadelphia, where we brought in our own containers and everything. So it was a really unique business in the fact that it wasn't straight retail, it wasn't straight e-commerce. It wasn't all our products, with a combination of us just drop shipping other people's products, us bringing in our own products. And it grew to be just about 40 million last year. So it was a fairly substantial size company. And as you mentioned, I actually just exited in November. We went through roughly a 2-year process of trying to sell it and get it marketable and all that good stuff.
That's awesome. I mean, first of all, what does it feel like to not have it after 11 years? I mean, I've been
It's
doing
weird.
this about almost 10 years. And as
Yeah.
much as sometimes it drives me crazy to do this business, but I'm attached to it. Like it's like my child. Like I have this thing with Retail MBA. Like I can't leave it because I love it. I mean, what's that like for you?
Yeah, I got to the point where I kind of lost the passion for it. Because to be honest with you, I didn't really enjoy kitchen cabinets. I didn't even have a background in it when I started the company. It was more the marketing and the just the strategy side of it that I really enjoyed. So once we got to a certain point where it was bigger than I could manage, 'cause honestly, my skill set is not managing large teams. So once it started getting too big, even though I brought in an operations manager and everything, I figured it was just about the right time to get rid of it and hand it off to another or somebody else that might have a better skill set than I would in terms of taking it to the next level. So that's what we did. We started the process about 2 years ago. Originally, I went through a traditional broker and wasn't the greatest experience. And then I went through our mutual friend, Steve, who had kind of a different approach to the sales side of it. And that side of it kind of opened my eyes to a lot of different things in terms of like how to sell a business or what to look for when people are actually, when you're thinking about selling a business.
Yeah, I absolutely get that. So you 11 years, you're like, I'm getting really tired of doing this day to day. I need something different. So you decide that you're going to go and sell this company or do something with it. What was the thought process? Did you have another business in mind? I'm just curious. Or what? Or you
Yeah,
just
so I had already started a software development company.
okay.
The unique thing about our company was that there were no shopping cart solutions or CRMs that really fit what we needed. So we basically built our own.
Yeah.
Uh, so we ended up trademarking and patenting our own CRM system, our own shopping cart solution, a couple mobile apps, and other things that we use within the business. So we had already kind of built this other business on the side.
Sure.
I had always been talking to other people who had exited companies. The big thing that everybody always said was have something in mind that you want to do next, because otherwise there'll be a huge void in kind of your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
So I had already started planning that years ago with the intention that at some point I would end up selling, and I want to make sure that I had something off the ground and running that I could just kind of step right into.
Yeah, I totally get that. So, okay. So what did you have to do to get the company ready for sale? Like, did you know that before or after Steve? Like, I know you started talking to a broker, so you had probably your paperwork together, but like, what did you have to think about to kind of move that along?
Actually, the paperwork was one of the biggest things, because when most people start a company, at least I didn't start it with the intention of selling it someday. I actually thought, oh, this will be great. I'll have it for the rest of my life. So from an accounting standpoint and, formatting and structure, I probably didn't start out correctly.
Okay.
So when I started talking to the brokers, just the way we were doing some of the financials and everything else like that, we really had to rework them and kind of rebuild some of the accounting models that we had, simply because we were kind of just doing it we weren't doing it in a really formal fashion like you would if you were going to sell a business.
So you found out that you needed to do much more paperwork and things too.
Yeah, just the way that we categorized expenses and everything else. Like, we were just kind of putting them into general expenses. We weren't really doing the true due diligence that you should when you're accounting for when somebody's going to have to go through your financials and look at it. So
you
that
had
was
to grow up, and you had to like figure out.
Yeah, I had to actually do professional accounting for a change, instead of just using it's a QuickBooks file and all that stuff.
So that was a little bit of a nightmare, basically, right?
Yeah. I mean, our data wasn't horrible. It was just some of the stuff had to be recategorized. So that was probably the biggest, the initial thing that I discovered was, just the way that you account for everything, like how you set up the company in terms of day-to-day responsibilities. So what we found out was a lot of the people want to make sure that I wasn't going to suck a lot of knowledge out of the business. So we actually started structuring the company so that there was a day-to-day operator and that I was just sort of a mentor. Okay. And then that way, when people were looking at the business and they were, trying to assess how much management they'd have to bring in, we made it so that it was so appealing that literally they could just walk right in and they'd already have everything still going smoothly without me being there.
By the way, what percentage was it on Amazon versus e-commerce?
So Amazon wasn't a huge chunk of our business. It was probably about 10%. Okay. But we use Amazon a little bit different way than most people, because our cabinets really didn't sell on there. So we actually used Amazon as a lead gen. We would sell other people's products at lower price point products to kind of get them used to the buying cycle with us. And then once we had them in there, we would then try to bring them over to the actual main business, which was the cabinet business. So
cool. That's a good idea.
Yeah. We leveraged Amazon for what they're good for, which is driving traffic.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you start talking to this broker and you're like, I got to work out my expenses and stuff. And like, did you have a dollar amount in mind to sell the company? $40 million is very different than some of my other clients, right? So, I mean, it was like for 1 year or multiple years, or like what was I don't know. What were you talking about?
It was interesting. There's really two different philosophies out there in terms of when you're going to sell the business. Some people look at just straight EBITDA and they give a multiplier based off of that. What I really liked about what Steve did was we actually did a 5-year forecast model, and then he went out to the marketplace and actually said, what would this be worth to you, instead of assigning a value to it. And which I thought was a really interesting approach, because if you put a price tag on it and you put it in the marketplace, it's a lot like selling a house. Like, people come in and they're just trying to find ways to beat down the price. But when you go to the marketplace and you're strategic about it and you're reaching out to people that might have a strategic advantage by buying it, they set the price, and then they're trying to find ways to justify what they just set the price at. So it's a really different conversation that you're having, and especially when they're going through the numbers, they're not nitpicking. They're actually looking for ways to support what they've already justified in their own head. So it's a really different dynamic when you're going to the marketplace, because when we first went with a broker, we set a price and then everybody was just trying to beat us down. And then the second strategy obviously was go to the marketplace, and we were getting prices that were significantly different than what we were getting before when we were just putting a price tag on it.
So, by the way, guys, I did an interview with this guy, Steve. And so, take a look at the Steve interview that I did related to this conversation. We did not mention Gary in this interview, but now that he's willing to share the name of the person who helped him, it's just kind of fun to have additional information. So definitely take a look at that interview. So, all right, so let's get back to it. So all of a sudden he's looking around. He's like, what's this business worth to you? And like, what was going on in your head while this was going on? Was it stressful? Because I remember you saying to me, like, we're getting offers and you're rejecting them. There was like a lot going on for you, right? And like, were you getting emotional throughout
Yeah.
this process? Were people like insulting you? Like, part of the reason why people don't do this type of work is because they don't want to hear other people's crap, basically, when they're, you know, getting people's opinions about your business, right? It's kind of like your child, right? So
Yeah, it was stressful in a lot of different ways. I went into it, I guess, a little naive. We got the first offer, you know, you get a letter of intent, and you start to mentally check out. Like you're thinking, okay, here I have an offer, you know, this is great. Unless they find something wrong, this is going to go through. Well, that ended up happening 5 times. So we actually had 5 different buyers come through the cycle.
5.
Yeah. 2
Were
of
they like
them
crap offers? Is that why you said no?
No, they were actually, I mean, 2 of them were, well, I should say the first 3 were really good offers. The first 2, the buyers couldn't come up with the money in the end. Third one,
That's like awful. Wait, hold on. So you do all this work, he goes out and he pitches it for you, you get a letter, you get the whole thing, you think you sold your company, and then they can't come up with the money in the end.
Yeah. So you go through, our letter of intents were roughly 60 days. So you essentially take your business off the market for 60 days and you can't do anything with it. You can't talk about it, can't do anything while they go through the due diligence. So that was probably the most challenging part, was trying to maintain the day-to-day operations while mentally having already checked out. And like, it was basically like having 1 foot in, 1 foot out, trying to navigate that path and make sure the business kept growing.
But what about the people who wanted to buy? I mean, did you like them? Were some people annoying? Like, what was that like?
They're all over the gambit. The ones that ended up buying it, I actually got along with really well. Some of the other ones I got along with, there was only one that like I ended up walking away because I knew it wasn't going to be a good fit afterwards. Because the personalities were clashing. But yeah, it's almost like a courtship. I mean, you're learning about them, they're learning about you. You know, personalities aren't always going to fit. They may have different ideas what they want to do with the business than you do. So there's a lot of like going back and forth, and kind of, it's almost like dating in a lot of respects, like trying to figure out how they're the right match for you, because ultimately you're going to have to deal with them for some extended period of time. So you really better like the person that you're selling it to.
So, okay, what kind of numbers are we talking in terms of like, so somebody's looking at their company, they have an Amazon business, whatever business, la, la, la. And one of the things that Steve and I were talking about was the fact that the valuation of your company increases with the number of retail accounts and distribution. You know, the more that you add to your company, the more grounded you are in business, and you seem like a more strategic company to buy and so forth. But like, when you were getting started, what was the expectation, how much money you were going to make off the sale?
It was 2.5 times EBITDA at the time.
Okay.
It was a fair number, but I didn't it was fair based off of accounting numbers, but I didn't think it was a very good number. When we went back, one of the things that we did, which is a really good tip for anybody that's watching this, we started looking at like, what did we do from a technology standpoint that we could trademark and patent? So we went back, we trademarked and patented a lot of the things that we did, even the processes. So like if you have SOPs or things like that, we actually trademarked a lot of that stuff. And then we sold it. Went back to the marketplace, instead of selling it as a physical product company, it was a technology company that just happened to sell kitchen cabinets. So we were getting a much higher
Steve maneuver. Was that a Steve maneuver, or was that a your maneuver, or both? Did you guys?
I think it was a combination of both.
I mean,
I think probably
you, but I'm just curious. Like, that seems like a weaselly, like, kind of Steve maneuver, where like, go immediately get trademarked on all these different things, right?
But it adds, so you're adding intellectual property to the sale price. You're adding a lot of different things, and our multiplier ended up going from 2.5 to roughly 7.5. So that's a huge number when you start talking about bigger numbers. Yeah.
So when you're saying 2.5, you're saying somebody's revenue. Like, so say you make $1 million a year. Yep. So your expectation a year, or total a year, I guess. Yep. So it's only by year, or is it total?
Yeah, it's by year. So it'd be earnings before interest and taxes for a year.
So you make $1 million a year, and so you probably sell it for $2.5 million, like on average.
Yeah, somewhere.
If you start getting creative in the process and start making yourself look cooler than you are, then, not that you're not, but you know what I'm saying, like with the trademarks and whatever, then suddenly you're like seven times.
Yeah. And other ways to do that would be through like recurring revenue streams or membership programs. Those kind of things add a ton of value to the bottom line, because then they see
Got it. Yes.
Yeah. So for us, it was very transactional. I mean, we didn't have we had 50% of our business was repeat business, but the other 50% we never saw again. So our business had a lot of challenges when it came to kind of calculating the EBITDA. So for us, shifting it from that to a technology company really was the best option for us.
I love that. That's so smart. That's so smart. I mean, I can understand that. Like a supplement company has recurring membership model revenues and stuff like that. You're selling cabinets. How many cabinets are they going to buy? Right?
Yeah. So I mean, the average homeowner only buys one kitchen over the course of 20 some years. So it's like,
how did you get repeat buyer? You're talking about like you sold to bigger established companies?
So we started working with contractors and builders. But what we also did was, which added a tremendous amount of value too, is we had a lot of strategic partnerships. So we increased the lifetime value, even though that person would only buy from us once, by offering them appliances, countertops, things that go into the kitchen, things that go into other rooms.
Sure.
We kept that lifetime value growing. And that was a huge bonus for us as well. By the fact that we were able to increase our lifetime value by almost $300 per customer over the course of a year, that added a tremendous amount of value to the bottom line.
That's amazing. I love that. Okay. I want to get back to this. Hold on. So you have an offer, you have 60 days, you can't do anything. After 60 days, they say sorry. And then you do it, then you have to do it again. And then it's another 60 days and then sorry. So it took a really long time.
Yeah, that's
and then
why
the third person you don't like, so then he's gone. And then the next person, la la la. So that sounds like misery. Whatever. You're chilling
test
out.
Your patience. That's for sure. It's not a pleasant experience, especially because you never know when it's going to end. After the second one, I didn't put my mental state into being sold. I just assumed that I would have to keep going, for whatever, another year or two. And that was the only way that I could keep going and still keep the business running smoothly without having mentally checked out.
So do you have to help run the company after you sold it?
So I stayed on as a consultant. I'm actually a consultant now until November. All I was doing at the end before I sold was the marketing side of it. So the day-to-day operations was already handed off to somebody else anyways. So I do consulting with them, like strategies that we've already tried to implement, things that we were planning on doing. And I help them implement the 5-year forecast that Steve and I put together.
Cool. So you're just kind of like helping them move along. So that's the exchange. Do you have any equity in the company or anything like that? Or are you done?
So they created a new entity for it. I retained 10% ownership of that. But I wanted to minimize that as much as possible too, because everybody always says if you don't get the cash up front, you're most likely never going to get it. So I wanted to keep as little of the equity or back end cash as possible. So I was able
to dude, I want to get out of this. I don't care. You're like, give me the money. Give me the money. Yeah, I get that. So, but it's kind of cool that you sold the company, you have all this cash, and you get 10% money.
Yeah, I mean, and in reality, their plan is to potentially sell it within the next 5 or 6 years. They're basically rolling it up with a couple other companies. So it could end up being worth a lot more than the 10% ownership that I have, but I wanted to minimize that risk and just get the most of it. I figured I could do more with it than letting them kind of handle it for the next couple of years.
Like, how would you feel if you sold this company and then they just shut it down like shortly after? Would it have just been like?
Yeah, I still have. It's hard. It is, like you said. It's like your baby. Like I'm passionate about the fact that I want to keep seeing it growing, and obviously I care about the employees and everybody that's still there. So I don't want to see it fall. And I think I set it on a path that it should continue to grow for the next couple of years. I think that's one thing that kind of mentally keeps me sane, is that I know that we built out a really good platform for it to continue to grow.
Yeah, I remember this one company, Le Belange, and I lived in San Francisco for a long time, and it was like these coffee shops, and it was like people loved that place. And then they sold out to Starbucks, but they kept the brand or whatever, and like this guy worked on it for 20 years, not to freak you out or anything. And that's not the purpose of this, but it was just more like for me mentally. So what eventually, like 2 years in, they took the processes of manufacturing and they shut the whole thing down. Excuse my language. Yeah. I mean, so to me, like, I think about those things when I think about selling the company, and I'm like, wow, that's like really, like there's a lot of feelings involved, after so many years. Not like it's going to happen to you or anything, but like, some of us are looking at opportunities and then have those question marks, but I guess you can't really control it. You really have to just make it.
Yeah, you almost have to take the emotion out of it.
Don't
I
you
saw,
wish you could?
feelings in the beginning, like when they were making decisions that I didn't necessarily agree with. But then I kind of mentally just said, it's not my business anymore. They have the right to do what they want with it. I can give them the best advice that I can give them, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's their choice to do what they want with it. And I had already started moving on. So I think the key is to have something else to go to, or another plan of action, because if you become so emotionally attached to that business, you are going to get that kind of angst and you're not going to agree with some of the things they're doing and everything. So at least that I had something else to move to, I can kind of spend my time doing something different.
So how'd you figure out the broker thing? Because I know a lot of e-commerce players and stuff reach out to brokers, and like when they're trying to sell their company. Was that just through word of mouth, or did you go online? Like when you were?
Yes, I relied on word of mouth for the most part. I've always gotten better advice from asking my friends than I would if I did my own research on something like that. And it's a really unique niche. Like I said, the first one didn't necessarily work out for me, even though they became highly recommended. And the challenge was that they weren't used to selling something that was both had both a physical location and an e-commerce aspect to it. So there are challenges to those kind of things, and working with the wrong broker, you may end up leaving money on the table that you necessarily shouldn't have. So it's
So do you recommend finding a broker that's done the work? I mean, similar to yours, I guess.
so to me, it's interviewing them and seeing what their process is. Now that I understand the difference between somebody setting a price and somebody kind of strategically doing it, I would always go for somebody that's more strategic about it, because they are in the end of the day should be getting you more money than they would if they're just putting a price tag out and setting it out in the marketplace.
What about so I deal with obviously a lot of Amazon sellers, and they're always talking about how there's these equity firms that are buying up a bunch of different physical product companies, and they're all moving it up to like one entity or whatever.
Yep.
Do you think about that? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I've heard a lot about equity companies.
Yeah, I mean it's a growing trend. In fact, right before I sold, I was at the point where I was either going to buy one of our competitors, or I was to roll them up, or I was going to sell to whichever the next buyer was. So there is something to be said about rolling up multiple businesses, and because you can get a higher multiplier once you hit like certain thresholds of revenue. The multiplier actually goes up because it becomes more attractive to bigger companies. So even for somebody that may be a smaller Amazon seller that wants to exit, or that's may know other people within the same niche, we've even talked to partner companies and said, hey, what if we just make an agreement together to roll together and put this on the marketplace as two businesses coming together but not actually having to buy each other. So looking at like strategic ways to kind of roll up multiple businesses at the same time I think it's a great way to make an easy increase in the multiplier.
That's interesting. That requires a lot of trust, and that's also really interesting. You know what I mean? I like that. So these Amazon sellers, some of them don't make as much as you did, and they don't sell that much, but they want to sell their company and they want to just move on to the next product. So what's the minimum amount that they're making that they should start considering selling?
I don't think there's a minimum. I think what you would have to do, the lower lower price point or lower revenue numbers. For me, I would actually start reaching out to other people in the niche that may be selling complementary products but don't necessarily compete with what you're selling, and figuring out if there's a partnership that way. That was actually how we got
to sell, or partnership just to make more money together.
Both, because a lot of times those guys are looking to expand, and especially with Amazon now, to launch a new product is so much harder than to go buy an existing product that has some traction. So even if they're not doing crazy numbers, if they can buy something that's already existing, has reviews and all that stuff, that's a lot easier than them trying to launch that same product on their own and try to kick it off from the ground.
But if someone's making like $300,000 a year on their site, which is still like, it's not chump change, it's still something on a single product or whatever a few SKUs. Like, is that too early on to sell?
I don't think so. I mean, it depends on how long you've been doing that. If it's only been a couple months and there's not a lot of history to it, it's going to be a lot harder for somebody to buy it because they don't know the patterns, and if there's ebbs and flows in the cycles. If it's been a couple of years and you have a track record of continued growth, and you can actually see when there's spikes and drops in sales, I think that's a great time to do it.
Maybe longevity is more important than the actual number.
Yeah, because if you only have like a 3 month track record, it's really hard for somebody to judge whether that was the initial interest in it or if that's sustainable. Whereas if you have multiple years of history, you can see our business at least had really distinct cycles when I could tell what month was going to be much higher than another one. And I had all that history that I could show somebody and say, here's where our patterns are. Here's where you're going to see spikes and everything else.
I mean, were you always increasing revenue year over year, or did you have crap years?
We never grew less than 40% a year. So we were always somewhere
You're
between
like the
40.
unicorn, like the anomaly. Not everybody has that. What if they have like a crap year last year and then they're better this year? And what do you do there? You know what I mean?
As long as you can justify why, I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of people don't analyze the numbers enough to understand why they have a bad year, why they have a drop. What I found is, even in talking to, because I've looked at buying other businesses as well. And when somebody could justify why they had a drop, or they could show me the data to support it, it was always easier to justify than to just somebody, suddenly losing money and they want to exit. So it really depends on like what the pattern of that is and how that can affect future growth.
Steve mentioned that he actually, like, the longer the business has been around, it gets actually more complicated because there's a life cycle to certain products and so forth. So it's always tricky, right? You never know. Should I start early? Should I start later? Should I do a year from now to 5 years from now? So like there's so many variables. I guess you just have to feel it out and decide for yourself what feels right and start talking to people.
Yeah, and I think one of the unique things is, especially if you're dealing with Amazon sellers or somebody that may not be on a lot of platforms, there's huge potential for them to expand to other platforms. So there's still a lot of growth opportunity, even if Amazon or whatever marketplace might be slightly tapped out for them. I think that's the key. But yeah, like Steve said, let's say we were around for 11 years, but luckily we were able to sustain that growth. But if we had kind of plateaued, it would be a lot harder to justify a higher number, simply because we were on every marketplace that we can be. It would have been a lot harder to justify getting that higher number than if the fact that you had multiple platforms that you could still put product on.
So is there anything else you would say to a physical product company who's thinking of selling or like on that path, or you got any tips or suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, I know that there are private equity firms that are buying up Amazon businesses, but for me, my strategy has always been to diversify traffic flow. We didn't have one traffic source that was more than, I think, 18%.
You mean like selling on Amazon versus selling on your site versus selling at a retail?
Yeah, like Facebook ads, Google ads, all that stuff. That all created a scenario that, let's say tomorrow Facebook shut us down, it would hurt, but it would only be about 18% of the business or 15% of the business. So it wouldn't completely wipe us out. I think, at least for me, if I was buying a business right now and I saw that all the eggs were in one basket, that would create some sort of angst for me, unless I had a pipeline to feed it into. So to me, I always look at
Google and Facebook as distribution strategies.
Yeah. So there's Google Shopping, Facebook ads. We drive a ton of traffic. You wouldn't think about it, but for kitchens, we actually drive a lot of traffic from Facebook. We use sites like house.com, walmart.com, like all those sites. You don't get a huge amount of traffic from them, but every little bit just adds up to additional revenue.
Sure. So, so the main thing is diversify so that when you are talking to somebody, you can show proof that you're not just like a company that can fall over tomorrow if something changed, some algorithm change or whatever. So definitely expand your business, which is good for what I teach, right?
Yeah.
And anything else you can think of about?
I would say there are a couple things that come to mind would be that diversify your traffic flow. Try to create a brand around it. One of the mistakes I think that we made is we didn't really brand it. I went more for an SEO value within the name and everything. And it from a marketing standpoint, it probably wasn't the best name to choose. So, when you're building something that you think you're going to sell, try to create a brand around it so that even if somebody knocks it off, they can't really knock off the name or the reputation of it. Diversify your traffic flow. And what else? I had another one. I can't remember now.
And just be patient, I guess.
Yes, be patient. Oh, and then build out a model so that if somebody is looking at it, if they're looking at the business and you can project 5 years out that you'll be at a certain number and you have reasons to justify it, that changes the whole conversation, because they're no longer looking at just your revenue now. They're factoring in what it could be in a couple of years.
So here's our projected revenue in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years.
Yeah. And I don't just make it up, but actually have financials to back it up. Like that was one of the things that we did, was we modeled it out and had a professional accountant kind of go through the numbers so that if somebody scrutinized them, it wasn't like we just pulled it off the top of our heads. We actually had an accountant that sat down and really mapped out where expenses and revenue and everything would be coming from.
So are you happy with the sale?
I am.
Are you
I
all
do have one
wealthy
other
and
thing.
are you wealthy, fat, and happy now? Just chilling or what? What are you
I
doing?
don't
Like,
think I'll ever be comfortable.
you're one of those.
Yeah,
Some of us can go play and travel around. Some of us
I have a lot
create.
more freedom to do things, but I still work every day. I still do, we're launching other products. We're doing a whole bunch of different stuff. So, we've got a lot of things in the hopper.
Some people. This happened like a couple months ago, man. Go play, man. I'll never understand you, but I love you. So that is awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to explain what you're
Yeah.
up to. I appreciate it. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to mention, but I just want to say thanks. It's really exciting.
Yeah. And if anybody's interested, I throw random thoughts on my blog. There's nothing to sell there. It's literally just me talking about different things we've gone through in the business, but it's just GaryNealon.com. If anybody wants to go look at the blog and read some content from we do like case studies and split testing and stuff that we test on our own site. So it's good stuff for people that are kind of running physical product business.
You're talking about nerdy topics related to driving sales and marketing to your physical product company. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
As I so eloquently put it. Okay, good. So if you want to learn about these topics, go to GaryNealon.com, Nealon.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, sweetie. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.